we are also dealing with an impact of the tar sands on the energy crisis that we are facing today. The tar sands is seen as this great panacea for the problems that we face in terms of energy and oil in the future. So why worry? Sit back and relax. The 21st century is taken care of with the tar sands boom. Right? No. The answer really is the fact that what we are dealing with is a very false solution. We continue to pamper ourselves with regards to oil. We continue to think that we can live with this kind of oil addiction well into the future, and without realizing the extent to which we are also triggering an energy crisis in the midst of all of this as well. First of all, we also need to, in that context, we need to take a look and understand the extent to which we are entering into or may already be in a period of peak oil. And by a period of peak oil, we mean that the production, the ability to produce oil from conventional sources has almost or is rapidly drying up, as this chart shows. At the same time, the consumption rate for oil, which is that line that goes up through the middle there, is actually showing an exponential growth in the opposite direction. And so by simply developing the tar sands, we perpetuate that kind of oil addiction rather than forcing us or compelling us to really start to take a hard look at what fuels our society and what our future should look like. World demand for oil is roughly around 80 to 84 million barrels a day. It is expected by the year 2030 to rise to 116 million barrels a day, and that's a very conservative estimate, adding on the growth in China, the growth in India, plus the expanded growth that's going to take place in industrialized countries, most notably the United States. So therefore, we are really up against the wall with regards to the future insofar as peak oil is a part of that future. And when that decline starts to set in motion, that decline will be very, very harsh on us because we will not be ready for the decline when it happens. But Canada also is, even before that, is in danger of, or in the midst of it, is in danger of encountering another set of problems, and that is a huge natural gas shortage. As indicated before, a great deal of natural gas is used in the tar sands, and in fact, more natural gas is used to fuel the tar sands today in the extraction process there than is used to heat half the homes in Canada. So we are really using up a great deal of natural gas in order to produce the oil from the tar sands itself. And it's now estimated by geologists that we have less than 8.9 years of natural gas, conventional natural gas in this country. We may turn around and try to build the Mackenzie gas pipeline, which has been delayed and delayed for all sorts of good reasons in many ways, but that would take another 10 years at least to build that pipeline and put it in place. We may end up spurring on to the Alaska gas pipeline, or we may end up turning very quickly to nuclear energy to fuel the tar sands, and that is a very real prospect given the government in Saskatchewan prepared to put in place 5 nuclear reactors in order to get things rolling in that direction. But again, to build a nuclear reactor will take roughly 10 years. And when you put all that together, we will have run out of natural gas, at least in the conventional supplies by that time, which would be a very serious situation. On top of that, compounding that, we have a country in which well over a third of our population doesn't rely on oil from Alberta or Saskatchewan or any other part of Canada. 1/3 of the country, over 1/3 of the country, including all of Quebec, all of the Atlantic provinces, today rely on foreign imports, yes, from Algeria, from Saudi Arabia, and from Iraq. It isn't from Alberta that they get their oil, it's from those countries, those Middle East countries that part of the country is dependent on, the whole of Eastern Canada, and a part of Ontario as well. When you put this together, huge vulnerability could arise if there is going to be peak production in oil and there are cutbacks, and those cutbacks are further magnified. We can expect what they call oil shock waves, and those oil shock waves could hit that part of our country pretty hard. The fact is, we do not have Alberta oil going right across the country. As you saw from previous maps and everything else, our Alberta oil is designed to serve markets in the United States first and foremost, not a Canada First policy. We do not have a Canada First policy. And I think these are serious questions that we need to think about in terms of their implications. So instead of having, as was said back in the 1980s, this great fear of our national energy policy being put in place under the Trudeau government of the early 1980s, and of course that was bombarded out of the water pretty quickly by the capital strike that occurred under the Reagan administration and by the oil industry in the United States and also by Alberta, and gone was the National Energy Program. But we don't have an NEP like that anymore. What we do have is another kind of NEP, and that is no energy policy. Our policy is whatever policy we have is largely driven by markets, is driven by Houston, and is driven by the US-based oil giants. That's the problem that we're faced with. We do not have a national energy policy. And I think this is going to be increasingly a problem as we try to take control of what we have faced with the global situation that we will find ourselves in the near future. We do not have a made-in-Canada energy policy or strategy, and we sure as hell don't have a transition plan to move from a dependence upon fossil fuels to a renewable energy alternative. We do not have that in place. And as a result, we find ourselves, I think, very vulnerable in that context. So let's bring ourselves back again and to realize that we are really in a new era. This is not the 1980s when we had the National Energy Program. This is not another time in our history when energy has moved to the forefront of our history. This is a time when energy, yes, has moved to the forefront of our history in one sense, but in another sense, it is also characterized by conditions of peak oil, by conditions of climate change, by an economic crisis that is troubling us, by a water crisis that is growing and bubbling, and all of these things are converging at the same time. This calls for a whole new approach to politics, the politics of oil itself. And we need to rethink that and think about what the implications really are. We need to think about this, in my view anyway, in terms of just what it means to be serving the U.S. market and what it means to be faced with U.S. oil addiction itself. And right now, we all know, I think, that 25% of the world's oil is consumed by the United States. This amounts to something like at the present time, something like 20 million barrels a day are being consumed by the United States alone. 58% of this is of U.S. oil needs are now imported into the United States, and this means something like 12 million barrels a day, but other estimates put it at 13.5 million barrels a day. In any case, Canada is the number one supplier, foreign supplier of oil to the United States, surpassing Saudi Arabia in 2004. And we are in a situation now where, as a result of a meeting that took place in Houston in January, just after Harper was elected Prime Minister, a meeting took place in Houston involving officials from the oil industry in the United States and in Canada, and also from the government energy departments of both the United States and Canada. And at that meeting, a tentative agreement was made to increase Canada's oil production and export from the tar sands by 5 times, presumably by the year 2020.